Let me begin with a sentence in this source document that I think matters most. Democracy is not a noun, it is a verb. That line is the hidden center of the whole piece. Yes, the transcript starts with terrible numbers for Trump. Yes, it talks about the Reuters Ipsos poll, falling support for the Iran strikes, economic collapse in the approval ratings, and visible erosion among men and younger men. Yes, it hammers the cost of gas, diesel, food, and war. But underneath all of that, the document is doing something larger. It is trying to turn public disgust into civic motion. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 0 Fei. That is why I think the most valuable core logic in this source text is not simply anti-Trump, it is anti-passivity. The transcript is saying something painful but clarifying. A lot of Americans used to live with the background assumption that however messy politics was, someone somewhere inside the machinery was doing the basic work. Somebody was watching the numbers, somebody was gaming out the escalation path, somebody was studying the oil choke points, somebody was thinking about the constitutional basis, the economic spillover, the allied reaction, the cost to families back home. The source says that assumption has broken, and when that assumption breaks, citizens are forced into a new relationship with public life. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 2 Fei, they become less trusting, more alert, more angry, and potentially more active. That is what gives the document its energy. It is not only telling people to be horrified, it is telling them that horror has to become participation. This is why the Strait of Hormuz section matters so much. It is doing more than condemning incompetence. It is explaining why ordinary people now feel compelled to understand details they never wanted to study. They are suddenly learning about oil benchmarks, treasury yields, trade rules, war powers, bureaucracy, and the mechanics of escalation. Not because they asked for a hobby, but because the consequences of elite failure are reaching directly into their homes. That is a deeply democratic but also deeply dystopian moment. The public is not waking up through healthy institutional trust. It is waking up because trust has failed. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 2 Fei, and once people wake up that way, they start asking a different class of question, not just who is ahead in the next election, but who government is actually for. That question appears again and again in this transcript, even when it is not stated in those exact words. When the guest talks about money that could have gone to schools, clinics, healthcare, infrastructure, clean air, clean water, and ordinary security being redirected into war. The point is not only moral, it is constitutional in the deepest sense. It is about public purpose. It is about whether government exists to protect ordinary life or to feed a cycle of special interests, war profiteering, narcissism, and elite theater. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 0 Fei. That is why the source keeps talking about opportunity cost. Opportunity cost in this document is not a narrow budget concept. It is a political morality test. Every missile is set beside a school. Every act of destruction abroad is placed next to an unmet need at home. Every strategic boast is placed next to a family budget. Every claim of strength is placed next to a life made harder for people who never consented to carry the burden. That is a very powerful democratic frame because it teaches citizens to reconnect state action with lived consequence. And once citizens learn to do that, they stop being so easily managed by symbolism. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 0 Fei. This is also why the humanities section is so important when the doctor in the transcript drags the audience back to skin, temperature, eyes, children, parents, and bodies. He is doing more than rebuking cruelty. He is restoring scale. He is insisting that public life be measured not by the emotional tempo of social media, not by the meme logic of this administration, not by war porn or swagger clips, but by whether flesh and blood human beings are protected or sacrificed. That is a civic intervention as much as a moral one. It says politics has to come back down from the screen and return to life as it is actually lived. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 0 Fei, and that is exactly where the source wants the audience to go next. Back to town halls, back to protests, back to local organizing, back to campaigns, back to the question of who can be trusted to restore basic competence. The transcript does not romanticize this. It says plainly that the atmosphere is dystopian, but it also argues that some good may come out of this if people refuse to stay spectators. That is the significance of the No King's language and the repeated insistence that people show up, get involved, and understand that democratic institutions do not animate themselves. They have to be pushed. They have to be occupied by citizens who still believe public life can be redirected. Fei file site Fei turn 19 file 2 Fei. That is the part I think many people will miss if they read the source too quickly. They will hear rage. They will hear denunciation. They will hear a strong case that the war is illegal, unjustified, economically painful, and morally grotesque. All of that is there. But there is also a theory of democratic repair. And the theory is simple. Pain can become a teacher. not a good teacher, not a gentle teacher, but a teacher. The source is saying that millions of people are now beginning to realize they cannot treat politics as something done elsewhere by competent adults while they focus on private life. They are being forced to see how special interests, war-making, narcissistic leadership, and hollow institutions reach all the way into gas prices, healthcare, debt, housing, protest rights. And the stability of ordinary communities once citizens see that clearly, and now a new kind of politics becomes possible. Fay file site, Fay turn 19 file 2, Fay not guaranteed possible. That distinction matters because the transcript is not nay. It knows anger can be manipulated. It knows fear can harden into cynicism. It knows authoritarian politics often grows when people conclude institutions are fake, but it also points toward a different route. Instead of collapsing into despair, people can decide to re-enter the field. They can demand better leaders. They can rebuild expectations around real public service. They can strip prestige away from spectacle and return it to competence, humility, and human seriousness. That is why I think the leadership section is so revealing. The source does not define leadership as domination. It defines leadership as going first into risk and eating last when resources are scarce. That is an old moral standard. And it is placed directly against the style of power associated with Trump, a style described here as extracting first, enriching first, preening first, and leaving others to absorb the cost. Once you put those two models side by side, the electoral meaning of the poll becomes clearer. People are not just tired of Trump. They are beginning to remember what leadership should have felt like in the first place. Fay file aside, Fay turn 19 file 2. Fay, that memory can change politics because once citizens recover a moral standard, they become harder to distract with theatrical aggression. Once they ask whether government is serving the people or serving connected interests, they become harder to pacify with slogans. Once they see how an overseas war bends back into their grocery bill and their health care and their schools, they become harder to split into separate issue silos. And once they believe democracy is something they have to do, not just watch. The terrain shifts. That is why I do not think this source document is mainly about one poll. The poll is the trigger. The deeper story is the emergence of a citizen public that feels betrayed enough to start asking foundational questions again. Who pays? Who benefits? Who is protected? Who is ignored? Who gets reduced to a line item? Who gets turned into content? Who gets asked to live with the consequences of a government captured by spectacle and special interests? That is the civic energy hidden inside the transcript. So when I ask what this reference document is really trying to do, my answer is this. It is trying to turn private frustration into public agency. It is trying to tell people that their shock, their anger, and their exhaustion are not just emotions to be endured. They are evidence that government has drifted too far from its purpose. And if that is true, then the answer is not withdrawal. The answer is return. Return to democratic life, return to accountability, return to a politics that begins with people rather than power, return to the basic test, the transcript names again and again. Whether the institutions of this country still serve ordinary human beings first, that is why the poll matters, not just because it hurts Trump, but because it may be one of the first signs that the public is becoming ready to act like a public again.